So the purpose of this call today is to try to develop our thinking on the way forward for the national dialogue process, which, as we know, recently concluded its national conference in Juba in November of last year. And now we're thinking ahead, looking over the course of the transitional period, what the way forward might look like for the national dialogue process. I'd like to also take the opportunity to thank the U.S. Institute of Peace for their generous support in making these activities possible, and also both technical and financial support. So thanks very much for that. And also to give a quick overview of the event, we'll start with this panel discussion, which will be moderated by Mr. Sebit Williams. After that, we have a few discussants who will provide very quick, short reactions to the presentations and their thoughts on the way forward for the national dialogue. And then from there, we'll open up to a more general Q&A among the audience members. So I encourage you to make use of the Q&A box, which you'll find along the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type your questions into that box, and the moderator will select from among them and pose them to panelists as we go along. So with no further ado, we'll hand it over to Mr. Sebit Williams to guide us through the event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. David Deng. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this very important webinar on the South Sudan National Dialogue, the way forward. Now, as you already heard from Mr. David Deng, this event is organized in collaboration with the United States Institute of Peace and DEDCRO, a South Sudanese consultancy firm. Now, we're going to have a 90 minutes, which will be reflecting on the way forward for the national dialogue, and to also look at some of the policies that can be, policy lessons to inform other transitional processes in South Sudan. And we are honored to have a diverse panel of guests or experts that includes, of course, representative of the national dialogue, who will share their views on the national dialogue outcome, where it goes from here, and lessons that can be drawn from other transitional processes. So thank you all for coming. Let me take this opportunity right away to introduce our panel of experts, or our panelists who will be discussing with us. We have Mr. Abraham Awolich, who is the Deputy Coordinator, National Dialogue Secretariat. Mr. Abraham, you're most welcome, and it's good to have you in this particular panel. And we also have Dr. Pauline Riak. She is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Research at the Rumbek University of Science and Technology, South Sudan, and also Chairperson of the Board of Directors of the Sud Institute, a leading think tank research organization in South Sudan. Dr. Pauline, it's good to have you on this panel. You're most welcome. And also we have retired Bishop Enock Tombe. Retired Bishop Enock Tombe is a retired bishop of the Episcopal Church of South Sudan, Diocese of Rajab, and a representative of the faith-based groups to the IGAD peace talks. It's good to have you, Bishop, and you're most welcome. We also have Rajab Mohandis. He is the Executive Director Organization for Responsive Governance, representative of civil society at reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, RJMEC. Rajab, it's good to have you in this particular panel. And we're also honored to have guests from the region. We have Honorable Betty Bigombe. She's the government of Uganda's special envoy to South Sudan. Honorable Betty, it's good to have you here in this particular panel. Now, as you heard earlier from Deng, it's going to be 90 minutes conversation in this discussion on this national dialogue. Then the 45 minutes first will be, will have your views, and then the last 45 will have questions and answers, which will be by any of the participants in this webinar. So anyone who has any question to any specific guest, please put your questions in the box, brief and precise right away to the point. Now let's go and start our conversation, and our first panelist for this discussion is Mr. Abraham Awolich, who is the Deputy coordinator for the National Dialogue. Mr. Abraham, could you briefly please take us about some of the key accomplishments of the National Dialogue?
Well, thank you very much, Sebit William, and also to David and the team at TechCraw and the USIP for organizing this webinar, and to all people who are listening. I'm delighted that I could share this space with you. Now, with regard to the National Dialogue, as many of you are aware, we started the process in May 2017, and it took nearly 4 years to finish the process. And the process was a 3-stage process, starting with the popular consultation at the grassroots, and then to the regional conferences, and to the national conference. But in between the regional conferences and the national conference, there were thematic conferences with civil society, with the faith-based institutions, with the business community, and with the political parties. So what I could say about those processes is that those processes were all necessary, and they enabled the people of South Sudan to mobilize and to speak about the affairs affecting them across the country. And so throughout that process, at least some healing process took place. People spoke bitterly about what happened. And once they spoke, some people felt a sense of relief. As well, could say that National Dialogue, one of its main accomplishments is the unity that it brought among the people of South Sudan. Before the National Dialogue took place, many people used to think that South Sudanese people are bitterly divided along ethnic and tribal lines, and that the conflict was largely ethnic competition. But through the National Dialogue process, it became obvious that the conflict is largely a political violence, and it had nothing to do with ethnic communities. And that the ethnic communities are simply victims of the political violence which was brought to them wherever they live. But that is not to discount the fact that even at the local level, there are conflicts that are both intercommunal and intracommunal. And so largely, the people of South Sudan converge on the idea that if we are to move forward, we have to solve the problems that divide the country, put them aside, identify what the causes of those political issues are, and deal with those, and then move forward with the programs that bring the people of South Sudan together. And so through the grassroots consultation, the regional conferences, we were able to classify all the issues and put them under 4 thematic areas. That is, there were a lot of issues related to governance. A lot of issues that are concerning the security of the country and the economy, as well as social relations, which we call the social cohesion. So those issues were then grouped together and they were prioritized. So some issues that we felt were not as important and did not feature well were put together with other issues that we felt were of critical importance. And those are the issues that were presented to the delegates through the national conference. And so the national conference was essentially a summation of all the conferences and the grassroots consultation. Because in each conference, people made recommendations on how to transform governance, how to transform security, how to transform the economy, and how to transform the social relations. Those recommendations were now put before the delegates of the National Conference for consideration. And where people agreed in the National Conference, those things were now turned into resolutions. And so the final product of the National Conference are the final resolutions of the National Dialogue. And these resolutions are again grouped and thematically on governance, on security, on economy, and on social cohesion. And these are the views of ordinary people of South Sudan on how to transform the state, how to transform politics, how to transform the economy, and so forth. So these documents are now available as final products of the National Dialogue. And then the leadership of the National Dialogue made a final report of what they believe happened during the National Dialogue and what they believe needs to happen to move the country forward. That final report had entailed a very sharp criticism of the leadership of the country and the ruling party, and essentially asking the two leaders who have been political contenders in South Sudan to step aside and to hold national elections that are to be supervised by the international community that include IGAD, the UN, and the African Union. So that final report was presented to the steering committee, but it was rejected. The steering committee thought that the document was too critical of the system and that it was going to weaken the ruling party. And of course, other interests were going to be affected, so they decided to vote and reject the final report. So then the co-chair, the two co-chairs and the rapporteur decided to forego that final report and wrote what they call the covering note. And the covering note essentially took the same report and recast it in a different format. And it contained the same recommendations that for South Sudan that there are three things that have kept South Sudan in conflict. One is the political deadlock that has been created between two individuals, and two, that political deadlock has led to power struggle and violence, and three, as a result of that political deadlock and fighting and all of that, corruption has thrived, and it has actually driven the desire and increased the desire for power struggle. So to move the country out of this, then you have to deal with the political deadlock. You have to break the political deadlock means that the actors who are at the center of the political deadlock must exit politics. Otherwise, in their conclusion, South Sudan will never go anywhere without breaking that political deadlock. Second, if the two actors who are at the center of the political deadlock have to step aside, the new political leadership must be brought in through democratic elections that cannot be supervised by South Sudan, but by the international community. They concluded that the South Sudan government has no credibility to organize free and fair election. And as a result, you need an international, credibility from the international community. And their main worry is that even if the election were to be free and fair, and it is organized by the government of South Sudan, the parties will simply claim fraud, and that could take the country back to war. But if it is organized by the international body, they could simply say there was no fraud, such and such as won legitimately. And so, so if you organize such elections and the main contenders of the political dialogue are not participating, then the country is likely to move out of the political dialogue and the power struggle. And then now the country can then look at the provisions provided in the national dialogue resolutions and also the provisions in the agreement. And now they could use those as the agenda for the transformation of the country. So that is essentially what the final covering note of the national dialogue leadership is about. Now, with regard to where we are now, since the final conference, the leadership has compiled the report, inclusive of all the documents that have been produced from the grassroots, from the regional conferences and the national conference. And they have now produced this cover note. And these reports are supposed to be presented to the president and to the parliament for execution. Unfortunately, there is no parliament. So the parliament is yet to be reconstituted. And so when it is reconstituted, it will be given a copy. The presidency, given the controversy related to the covering note, is not interested in receiving the final reports of the national dialogue. So the final reports of the national dialogue have not been officially handed to the presidency as a result of that. And so that is where we are. What is contained in the final resolutions of the national dialogue as a way forward is that a body called the follow-up and implementation mechanism was supposed to be set up by the presidency to follow up the implementation of the national dialogue resolutions. The Secretariat has produced an implementation matrix which indicate what the resolution is, who is supposed to implement it, and when can it be implemented. So that is part of what is to be handed over to the follow-up and implementation mechanism to use as a way of following up on those resolutions. And of course, the conference knew that maybe the executive may not be interested in the resolutions. That's why they provided the second option, that if the executive does not implement the resolutions, then the parliament can take over the process and pass a legislation authorizing the establishment of follow-up mechanism to implement the resolutions of the national dialogue. So that is where we are right now. What is supposed to follow as well, and it doesn't have to wait for the setting up of the follow-up mechanism, is to popularize what the final products of the national dialogue are. And the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, is helping in that process, in producing some documents so that they can be treated. The COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, there will be conferences and seminars to disseminate the final products of the national dialogue. So that is where we are right now. And of course, there are institutions that have been authorized to continue to follow up the national dialogue process. The SET Institute, an institution that I'm a managing director of, and the Ebony Center, the South Sudan Council of Churches, as well as the University of Juba, have been authorized to be custodian of the national dialogue documents until, and to continue to advocate for the implementation of the national dialogue programs until such body can be set up to do the follow-up mechanism. So that is where we are with the national dialogue. I think I should stop here, and I would be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Abraham Awolich. We do appreciate you for that elaborate, telling us more, some of the key accomplishments of the national dialogue and also where we are right now. and of course the controversies in between. If I get it very right, up to now, the final resolutions of the national dialogue has not been given to the top leadership of the country. It's still with the secretariat. And yes, we'll get back to you later for some other questions or for questions of clarity. But for now, let's go to Dr. Pauline Riak, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor, University of Rumbek. And Dr. Pauline, it's good to have you on the floor. We're giving it to you. Briefly, just could you reflect on how the national dialogue and the peace agreement, which is the revitalized peace agreement, relate to one another, how they mutually how they mutually reinforce, and where they also have tensions with one another? How can we put all this together where the national dialogue can, support the peace, revitalized peace agreement, at the same time the peace agreement helping to implement some of the resolutions of the national dialogue? The floor is yours, please, Dr. Pauline.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I need to say my internet is very unstable, so don't be surprised if I get disconnected at any moment. But I think I would like to say that this is a very important discussion for our nation. It is important at the outset to say that the objectives of the RRCs and the national dialogue were different, and we should not expect the outcomes to be the same. The revitalized 2015 document focused on the contentious issues only. That is, there was a document, the RCs 2015. So the revitalized document focused only on chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1, chapter 2 dealing with security issues. Those were the two main contentious chapters. The other chapters essentially remained intact. Whatever changes took place were very superficial. So it is true that the RRCs was signed in September 2018, and it focused on power sharing or responsibility sharing between 5 different political and military giants in our nation. It also focused on the creation and the deployment of one united national army. The other chapters, chapters 3 to 8, plus the 4 annexes, were not discussed to any extent. On the other hand, the national dialogue, which began in December 2016, looked at a much broader picture than the RRCs, because the RRCs looked at the 2 chapters only, while the national dialogue looked at the whole country, including what was already in chapters 3 to 8. Now, it was assumed in the RRCs that if the issues of governance and if the issues of the security arrangements were fixed, then the implementation of the chapters 3 through 8 would fall in automatically, and in fact would satisfy much of what the people have said in the national dialogue. The national dialogue, I think, can be seen as a mechanism to bring all major political decision makers and stakeholders together after there's a serious conflict, or when government and the constitution fail to address the needs, the rights, and the expectations of all the people in South Sudan. As I said before, the RRCs focused on power sharing among the political, and we can say the military leaders. The changes in the 2 chapters of the current RRCs really address the fears of the political actors. And when I say political here, it's political stroke military actors. And it does not address any of the fears of the ordinary citizens of South Sudan. The chapters also, chapters 1 and 2, do not consider the restraints that should be placed on the political leaders to protect the basic rights or the freedoms or the liberties of the citizens of South Sudan. And we emphasize it was just a political power sharing agreement. The agreement among the leading political and military leaders, although this is vital for sustainable peace in South Sudan, I wouldn't say that it is sufficient, and it cannot pull this country together, especially when the actions or the inactions from the implementation are being handled by the same people who caused, or the same individuals who caused the problem in the first place. Because the RRCs concentrated on the 2 chapters only, it failed also to emphasize the basic issue of nation building, where consensus on issues like land, like boundaries, like the communal violence that we're experiencing, or the violence that is perpetuated by the state or non-state actors and on ordinary citizens, and where impunity and the rule of law sector prevails. When in trying to find out why were these things not included, as we discussed the RRCs in Addis Ababa and in Khartoum, I think probably there was a flawed theoretical framework that was used by the mediators and the friends of South Sudan, who tended to simplify the problems we were having by saying, well, it started a long time ago. It was simplified by saying that it was Bashir and Garam. Now, in our recent case, the problem was simplified by saying it is a problem between President Kiir and Dr. Riak. This analysis did not give room to address the real causes of the problem. Persistent poverty was never discussed. Illiteracy was never discussed. General underdevelopment and how to get out of it was never discussed, or was barely discussed. When it was discussed, it was touched by the civil society, and the mediators would have nothing to do with it because they were all concerned, and the others in the room, the political and the military leaders, were all concerned with dividing what they considered to be the power. They assumed it seemed, assumed that we were a nation and we were one people and we had one ideology. So the whole issue of building the nation did not come up very often. Came up by the civil society, but was often ignored. But we see today that in spite of the agreement, South Sudan remains in crisis. The RRCs on its own is inadequate to bring substantial peace to our country. The crisis is a result, it has been agreed by all, it's a result of leadership failure. Collectively, the political will does not seem to exist, and of course, power struggle continues to prevail. The lack of internal cohesion and the presence of security, the problem of security, is a real serious problem. Civil disarmament is the most important priority after the unification of the national army. All of us must be disarmed, and possession of arms must be criminalized for civilians and non-active military personnel. Now, let us look at the national dialogue to see how it is different from the RRCs, not as an alternative to the RRCs, but where it is complementary to what is called the Elite Pact in moving the nation forward. The national dialogue sought to know what the people had to say, people in general. It is said that it is more inclusive. It is said that it is bottom up. I am not so sure that it was really bottom up because I have participated with many of the participants at the grassroots level, at the regional level, at the national level. And they didn't look or behave, to me, any different than the group we're calling the elite. What it seemed is that there was a group that controlled, that is true, controlled the politics and the armed security forces. And there was a group here that did not control, but had the potential to control things that are taking place, where the RRCs people were blaming the national dialogue and vice versa. And nobody was clear or caring to really look at the nation and to see what the nation could benefit from both of these complementary activities. Having said that, the national dialogue needs to be commended because they have gone out to the people, although I am not sure about the inclusivity that is claimed by the dialogue, that it was inclusive. How inclusive? I didn't see farmers. I didn't see people from the marketplace. I didn't see the real grassroots people were not visible to me. Anyhow, and if we're talking about the people of South Sudan, and we don't talk about transformational leadership, we don't talk about universal education, literacy and numeracy for all the 13 million of us, then I have a problem. We don't talk about giving raw cash, $100, say, to every South Sudanese on a monthly basis as compensation for our national resources. And the point I am making is that it is true, we had a dialogue in Addis and in Khartoum. It is true, we had what is considered a more inclusive dialogue here, but I still think that the real people who form the 80+ speaking, neither to the national dialogue or to the RRCs. We say the national dialogue was funded by the nation, and the RRCs was funded by external forces. However, when funds that are used become opaque, I have never seen any financial auditing or financial briefings from either side. So I don't know where funds came from for one or the other, but I know what is said, and all of us know what is said. Having said, sorry. So I just want to point out again that the RRCs was never intended to be inclusive, nor was it intended to discuss the problems of the country as a whole. It did what it was supposed to do, which was to deal with the two contentious issues, governance and the security arrangements. Now, I just say that moving forward, it is easy for us to say all these words. Moving forward become extremely difficult, because moving forward mean that our leaders and ourselves have to exhibit a certain kind of humility that has been totally missing from our nation for a very, very long time. We have to find a way, and I don't know here where the churches or the religious institutions, how they can help us as a nation to agree that peace is paramount. Peace, unity is needed. We have to stop the killing. And the political leaders must be able to find a way to put their pride in front of them and to be able to work together. No matter how they hate each other, they have to be able to work together in the interest of the nation. And by doing so, use the documents, the inclusive national dialogue, if that's what we want to call it, and the elitist RRCs, because they're both saying chapters 3 to 8 and the national dialogue have many, many things in common. So we pick from both what is truly South Sudanese and move with it. But it cannot be done by one person. It cannot be done by blaming one person. And we must understand that it is in the interest of our political and military leaders to stall everything and to keep the status quo as it is, because they stand to gain. It takes a lot of courage, a whole lot of courage, which I'm not sure where it will come from, for us to say, okay, this is time to stop and move forward. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pauline, for that great speech and conversation about the national dialogue and how they relate to the peace, the revitalized peace agreement. Now let's go and get some perspective from Bishop Enock Tombe, who is the retired bishop of the Episcopal Church of South Sudan, Diocese of Rajab. Bishop Enock, you have been so involved with the peace agreement, of course, the negotiations all along until a peace agreement was reached, which is the revitalized peace agreement. And now there is, of course, the national dialogue process that took place. Just briefly take us, just give us a step back and consider, some lessons for bottom-up processes moving forward, some of the homegrown solutions to the crisis, what it looks like, and also how do we create space for South Sudanese to have the discussions that are needed to forge a common understanding of the challenges that they face or give to solutions. Enock, I will give Bishop Enock, rather I will give you the floor right away.
Thank you, Sebit William, and the other panelists and those who are also listening. I want to take you back to the beginning of the South Sudan National Dialogue process when the president announced it in December 2016. We happened to be also in Nairobi as church leaders. We were also anticipating the same thing. And we were asking ourselves, what was the purpose of a national dialogue? We look at Kenya, we look at Uganda, we look at Sudan, learn from them. And we found out that when the political leaders call for national dialogue, there is an agenda to achieve. And I think having heard from our two colleagues, Abraham Awolich and Dr. Pauline, it's very clear. There is an agenda always. It's not what we assume. For Bashir, Sudan under Bashir, while they were holding national dialogue in Khartoum, they were burning villages in Darfur, if you follow that properly. For Kenya, the government wanted to implement a federal system, 47 counties, and also address the issue of gender balance. And for Uganda, with due respect to Honorable Betty, let me just say it, this is a scholar from Uganda. He said it is to maintain a status quo. So we were then wondering what would be the purpose for our national dialogue. As we speak now, it is maintenance of the status quo. I think Pauline has made it very clear. It's not for change, it's to maintain status quo. Chapter 2 and chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the agreement is very clear on that. Secondly, I want to say, when you talk about this bottom up, what are the other levels? We have the top level, the political military level, and then the middle level, which is the church and civil society and academia. Actually, this panel, this webinar is, I think, we are the people in the middle. And we have a duty to go and listen to the people at the bottom. Pauline said she had been to all those levels. I think she will really help us. And that's why she would say what the people are saying is not what is being talked at the national level. So it's our duty to listen to the people and then together with the people at the bottom, bring up pressure to the people at the top. It's not the United Nations. It is the people and the people and those in the middle to bring pressure. Like the Woodley, 1999, those of you who know the Woodley, and other bottom-up processes. Why is it very important? Is if the people own the process, they will support it. In terms of resources, in terms of welcoming whatever happens. But if it is not, the people are not involved, of course there will be spectators. They will just be watching what is going on, just like the archives or the repertoire archives. They were not part of it. Secondly, involving the people means that it will be sustainable. Because when the donors, for example, IGAD or UN, eventually get fed up and they pull out, the people will continue, come rain, come sunshine. They will just, because that's their own thing. And then thirdly, actually, I was wondering, Awolich had just briefed us, what happened? Are the people now informed? You know, remember the process started 2016 and ended November 2019. Had the people got the feedback, you know, after 3 years or 4 years of national dialogue? So the owners, the people need to be informed what has happened now. And thank you, Awolich, for bringing that up to now. The report even not submitted to the presidency, let alone the national parliament not yet formed. And then I'm saying, what about the people? Do we have to wait until the government is informed, or should we now, you the custodians of this document, should really begin the process of taking back the message to the people that we have done our best? This is where it has stopped. And then it's the people now to take it from there. However they do it, they will do it in their own way. So I wanted to stop there so that it give more chance to people to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bishop Enock Tombe, the retired Bishop of the Episcopal Church of South Sudan, Diocese of Rajab. Well, let's go now to Rajab Mohandis, who is the Executive Director of Organization for Responsive Governance. Rajab, as well, you have been following this peace agreement. You have been in the center as well of following this national dialogue as a civil society activist. Just share with us the civil society perspective on this particular national dialogue. I'm giving you the floor right away.
So I think we lost Rajab. He's just rejoining now.
Okay. Is Rajab, all right, as we wait for Rajab.
Yes, I think just give him 1 second. He seems to be rejoining. But maybe in the meantime, we can start with Betty Begombe.
All right, we can go to Honorable Betty Bigombe. Honorable Betty Bigombe is the government of Uganda's special envoy to South Sudan. And Honorable Betty, you have played a very big role when it comes to, let's say, the peace talks in northern Uganda. And also as a special envoy to South Sudan, I do believe you have been following our national dialogue and of course the peace agreement. Just give us briefly, you know, a regional perspective of national dialogues. Particularly Uganda had one as well, especially with the issue of northern Uganda and the introduction of things to do like the Mataput, which is of course an Acholi word. Just take us through that and what South Sudan can learn from that national dialogue, if applied in our situation, can be able to resolve and solve some of the issues that South Sudan goes through. Please, the floor is yours right now, Honorable Betty. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, yes.
Okay.
Please.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the team for organizing this meeting. Some of us were extremely worried that all that effort that has been put into coming up with this important report might just sit and collect dust. So I'm relieved to hear that some work is still going on, and also very grateful to USIP for the support that they've given for the team to get to this level. First of all, the team members, I really would like to congratulate you very, very much for the work that you did and the challenges that you faced, because some of us were extremely skeptical whether the committee would complete its job. War was still going on in some parts of the country. People were still in internally displaced camps, even up to now. Not to mention refugees, not only in neighboring countries, but all over the world. So we were impressed and relieved too when the report finally came out. And it was refreshing to know how detailed it was. There's some, I mean, it could not be 100% correct, of course, but I think the effort that has been put in is commendable, and it's some document that can get us working. I'm sorry I'm not going to go into northern Uganda because we're looking for the way forward, and that will possibly come later. You know, any low intensity conflict, like the situation now in South Sudan, can be forgotten. Very little is talked about now. People talk about when hundreds of bodies are lying on the street. When it's malnutrition, you only hear from the UN. When people are killed or the tribal wars, very little information makes their way into the newspapers. So they're not big deal. So in my opinion, this is a unique opportunity, this report, that gives us opportunity to start mobilizing people again, that there is still no peace in South Sudan. Peace as we define it is not just the silence of the gun. It's when people can stay in their homes in dignity. It's when there is food security. It's when social services are available, when children can go to school. But the way it is, I said this before, but there's peace only in Juba. At the other webinars, I've said I've applied the road from Uganda to Juba. There's no peace all the way until you get to Nisitu. That's when there are activities. Occasionally, of course, you'll meet cattle rustlers on the way. And of late, there have been very many ambushes. So we cannot now sit back and say, oh, this has been implemented. No, this country is still sick. a lot of work has to go in to bring total peace. So that is why I'm saying that the national dialogue gives us yet another opportunity to run and wake up people. As I said, people are going to sleep. They think there is peace. When you find businessmen in Juba, and you know, some businesses thrive even better in a country that there's no system, there are no institutions that function, and people just forget because they're making money in that situation. So national dialogue, I think, is an important tool. I have a few questions about it. One of them, I was very impressed by Madame Pauline's presentation. But let me think is the challenges we have. How can we get the buy-in from SPLM in government? I was there at the closing ceremony, and I heard the reaction from the government after, especially the controversial issues of the two leaders must not contest elections. There was straight condemnation. For that reason, how are we going to get them to buy into this? Number two, SPLM in opposition did not participate. So we have a huge chunk of population that have not been heard. It kind of, what I'm raising in here is also goes to the inclusivity part of it. That if SPLM IO rejects it, how are we going to get them to persuade them to believe in this document? And I remember vividly when the report was launched, I was in Juba, of course, and SPLM IO was organizing their own convention, totally different from this. So how are we going to persuade them to be part of this and for them to that we can use, we can work with? Of course, along the way, we can improve on some of the issues. So I see that as some of the challenges. What about the regional leaders? I talked about fatigue. Now, I was thinking maybe we can start influencing IGAD, Council of Ministers, with this, because they would in turn report to their principals and hopefully convince them. Because it's a no-go area. It would be a waste of time, rather, if we decide that let's take them to the summit. I've attended these heads of state summits. Everything is praises, you've done very well, continue, but there's no, as Madame Pauline said, the focus is on power sharing. The accountability issue is completely blurred. That if you take 10 years to implement anything, it will not, nobody is going to run after you to say, well, you haven't done this, you should have done it. Hold you accountable for it? That is completely missing. So how can we get the regional leaders to support the process without them coming and say, well, you know, that's a sovereign state. We don't want to interfere. But this peace is for all of us. How can we persuade them, convince them that the peace is not only for South Sudan? The peace is for the entire region. And that is what is eager. So I see that as a challenge, that we need to start thinking, coming up with solid proposals on how to approach it, so that they don't put South Sudan on the back burner and say, oh, there's peace. I was just there. The independence anniversary is coming. Leaders will fly in and fly out. and they will report back that there is peace. So, like I said, summit is not the way to go. I think we need to come up with the regional leaders, regular visits that we make with when we have solid stories in our hands where they don't think they're interfering but helping a neighbor, where they look at it that what affects South Sudan affects all of us. Now, going back to on the report itself, I must say I have not read everything exhaustively. I've read some of them, but what there is talk of reconciliation. Let's not put our heads in the sand that there's no tribal element in all this. I sit with people, I talk with them, I discuss. What I would have wanted to see is that the country also discusses things, the wars, the tribal wars that took place in the 90s while there was the main struggle with Khartoum. There were lots of little, I'm a neighbor of South Sudan, and I still remember vividly, influx of refugees. It was not because of the war with Khartoum, but it was the tribal wars among the community. We're silent about all this. It still hurts some people up to today. They still want revenge about this because they will still look at what happened to them in 1991, what happened to them in 1992, and then come on to 2013 and all this. We need to go deeper into reconciling the past as well, bring the past so that people can talk about it, vent out their anger and their frustrations. So this is lacking, and again, on the inclusivity aspect, while it was a good job, but I don't think it was inclusive enough. In some cases, you would have still gotten the same response as you got what you have been able to document. So let me stop there. Happy to answer any questions later. Let me see if there's anything I left out. But I think let's stay this course and see what we come up with. That is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Betty Bigombe, as Special Envoy, the government of Uganda's Special Envoy to South Sudan. Now we're going to give a chance to some of our participants here to also ask questions, and we'll have with us that will be answering questions. We'll have with us here Dr. Harriet Kuyang from the University of, from Juba University or the University of Juba. We also have Dr. Francis Deng from the National Dialogue, and we have with us also Moses Mande, who will be asking questions. But just before I give these occupants the chance to ask a few questions, there are quite a few clarification or a few things that came out of our conversation here. And Dr. Abraham, I think you will be the first to answer these questions or give us clarity on them. And that is particularly on the issue of exclusivity. How exclusive was this particular national dialogue? Because you are a member. Did the people own this particular process? And also one of the question from Bishop Enock was about the issue of feedback to the people. Well, we all understand it hasn't been given yet to the presidency and the leadership of the country, but did you get back to the people? When were their feedback given back to the people? So just briefly tell us about the area of exclusivity. Was it as exclusive as should be for, you know, the people of South Sudan? Was it their process? Did they own it? And also about the feedback. Mr. Abraham, before we can go to get some questions from the other discussants, please.
Thank you very much, Sebit, and for the questions. Sorry, I had dropped off, had some connecting issues. But with regard to the issue of inclusivity and whether there were people excluded, it is debatable whether there was an exclusion. There were 53 political parties that participated in the national dialogue, but there were 2 parties or 3 parties that declined to participate in the national dialogue. One of them is the SPLM-IO, and the other is the NDM, and of course the NAS, Thomas Cirillo faction. The other NAS participated. These parties obviously made a political decision not to participate. And so whether you can say that they were excluded is debatable. They were excluded in a sense that they did not participate, but that was a choice. It was not a policy of the national dialogue to exclude anyone. The second aspect of inclusivity with regard to the population, all the people of South Sudan in their geographical coverage were represented in the national dialogue, both at the grassroots and the regional conferences, as well as the national conference. So there are 80 counties in South Sudan, 79 plus a BA. So representative representing those groups had all participated in the national dialogue. And as I mentioned also, the 53 political parties did participate, and the faith-based institutions and civil society. So I could say it was not 100% inclusive, because not all people were able to participate for obvious practical reasons. But also it was inclusive enough in terms of the issues that were addressed and in terms of the geographical coverage. And I would say all the ethnic communities of South Sudan did participate in the national dialogue. And so somebody choosing not to participate for political reasons is beyond the capacity of the National Dialogue Secretariat and the National Dialogue leadership. It would have been better had the National Dialogue been proposed after the peace agreement. But the National Dialogue was proposed when the country was falling apart in 2017, 2015. We all know what happened. And so the circumstances under which the process was initiated made it difficult for some political parties to participate, because it was initiated by a sitting government. And so in that regard, the process was not perfect in a sense. But the process itself, which the steering committee and the secretariat undertook, was a legitimate, open, and uninclusive process. And it was owned by the people of South Sudan. They were the ones that spoke, and they made their resolutions. And so in that regard, the process was a grassroots owned process, and people have participated willingly, and they did the best they could to express that. I could say the process was inclusive. What was the other question?
Yes, just very fast on the feedback to the people who participated, yes, to the people on the grassroots. Just briefly, please.
Absolutely, I agree. We need to go back to the people of South Sudan and explain to them what happened and what the views that they have expressed, how they have been considered, and the recommendations that they made to the national conference. How have they now been turned into resolutions? Now, the problem is that the steering committee has finished its job. This was the mandate, is to hold the national conference. And then their job is finished, it has ended. So what we had hoped would happen is that the follow-up and implementation mechanism would now then take up this step, which is to go back and popularize what has happened, what has come out. But in the absence of that, the SET Institute and the other related organizations will take up the challenge. And with the support of the UN and also any other partners, we will go around, preferably to the states, and explain what the final resolutions of the National Conference are and where the process is, until such time when the follow-up and implementation mechanism is instituted by the government. So it is a two-part process. We'll do an informal popularization, but the formal popularization and feedback to the people of South Sudan is a mandate of a body that is yet to exist, which is the follow-up and implementation mechanism. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Abraham Awolich, for answering those questions. Now, let's take some questions from our discussants who are also been in the forum. Dr. Harriet Kuyang, let's start with you from the University of Juba. Please welcome your question or comment.
Thank you, Sebit William, and for putting together a very wonderful panel. To talk about very critical issues at the right time. And just, following from the presentations by, Dr. Abraham, through to Dr. Pauline, through to retired Bishop Tombe, and through to Honorable Betty Bigombe, you start to pick issues around the complexity of the context. That South Sudan itself is a very complex context where things like the national dialogue and what drives that agenda cannot lead to honest outcomes at the end of the day. And that's the first interrogation, with regards to this discussion. Retired Bishop Tombe said, what was the agenda behind the national dialogue? And as one of the scholars in the field of transitional justice, particularly knowledge production, you start to see a glaring problem that the SPLM fronted the agenda of the national dialogue as one that is inclusive, that one that would look at the past, now, and the future, but their agenda was completely different. Have we looked at the underlying agenda of the national dialogue? And Sebit William, that's why you see when the people ask for the exclusion of Kir and Riak, that is not going to happen. Why? Because of what Dr. Pauline earlier on said, and Bishop Tombe, that the current leadership would want to maintain the status quo. And so the national dialogue process was undertaken more of a charade and to please, the region. I quite like what Dr. Pauline earlier on said, and I kind of like that statement that, different objectives of the national dialogue and different objectives of the agreement, would you expect the same outcomes? Never in a context like South Sudan. And these are some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves at this particular time. Look at the timing of the national dialogue and look at what it was proposed to achieve, inclusivity and all. Was it even inclusive? It was not. You move on to questions and key, debates by Honorable Betty Bigombe. And I want to go to that because, in where there's no political transition, where there's no democratic transition, what does the region do, Honorable Betty Bigombe? The region sits down and heaps praises on the incumbent political leadership. This is the norm. This is what happens. I completed my PhD in that field. would we expect them to look the SPLM in the eye and say, you are doing this wrong, this is not right? That has never, ever happened. So the question at this point, or the key things to take from this discussion, is where the incumbent leaders who have been perpetrators are still the ones making decisions on, the portions of the national dialogue resolutions that should be shared. They are the ones making decisions on the R axis, particularly transitional justice. So this is what is going to happen. I am sorry that I may come off as somebody who is so negative, but that's just the reality of things that the current leadership permits to happen in South Sudan is what is going to happen,
All right.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Harriet, for your comment and some questions. Later, we'll give a chance to our panelists to pick, if any of you can pick that later. But let's get also some questions or comment from Dr. Francis Deng. Dr. Francis from the National Dialogue. Dr. Francis, please briefly, just your comment or question, please.
Thank you very much. Am I coming across? Can I be heard?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Well, let me say that I have really very much enjoyed what I have been hearing, and I think everybody has made some very, very good points. I will not get into the specifics of what everybody said, but I'd like to make some very general comments. Number one, when people talk about what was the objective of dialogue, I think there might be what was made explicit and what was not said, but important. No one can quarrel with the principle of national dialogue. So we can say that a whole lot of people welcome national dialogue. It sounds good, it's the right way of looking at things, but
Yes, hello, Francis.
I do think is important is that the process itself began to play out in a manner that really made the national dialogue have a life of its own. Whatever the intentions of the original initiators, whatever the president had in mind, and a number of others who contributed to it, is important to a degree. But what is even more important is that national dialogue began to have a life of its own. And what is also very important is it opened doors for the people of South Sudan to speak out very openly, very critically, and without fear. And the good thing is that nobody was arrested, harassed, or imprisoned. So you could say that national dialogue actually opened a new page of freedom of speech. And I think what is also important is whether it was entirely inclusive, although I know the intention was that it should be inclusive, but whether it was inclusive or not, people spoke all the issues that concern the people of South Sudan. Whether they are the ones who said it or others said it, and we all heard it, whether you felt you were excluded or included, I think what was discussed is inclusive. And the attempt to cover the whole country is genuine. Some security areas could not allow being reached. Some individuals opted out. But all in all, you could say when we asked the question, those of you who were out, is there any issue you feel was left out? The answer has been a resounding no. No issue was left out. So you could say, whatever your definition of inclusivity or exclusivity, that the issues of the country were discussed. Now, what is important is where we are now. And I think what Pauline said before about the issue of complementarity is very important. We can say, as she said, there was a focus on the two chapters of the agreement, power sharing and security arrangements. You could say the rest of the agreements or the rest of the chapters are still to be touched upon. You could say if we have really achieved peace, if the parties have dealt with chapters 1 and 2 satisfactorily, although it is not yet completed, you could say that the whole country can now move to deal with all the other chapters. So what I think is happening is we are now in a situation where whatever the intention of the national dialogue, And whatever the controversies over the process, we now have a situation where the content of the national dialogue is something that everybody is interested in. So comes the question of where do we go from here? I think the debate over the report has been very important. It has raised the stakes high. And I think the more the stakes are raised, the more the country feels that it is important to find solutions. And therefore, national dialogue has gone beyond the dialogue of the steering committee and the committees, the conferences that were held. It's now a national issue. And it's a national issue in which, while the stakes are high, I think we have to begin to come together as to how to move forward. And moving forward,
Thank you.
I must say very quickly that something that was left out, although Honorable Betty mentioned it, is the linkage between the domestic and the regional international. We are surrounded by international issues, surrounded by international agencies, and we don't talk about foreign policy. So we now have to see how the domestic agenda links with the region and the international agenda to move forward together. And I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Francis Deng, for your comments. And now let's get very fast. Our next discussion is Moses Mande. Moses, are you there? Please welcome and just briefly go ahead with your comment or question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sebit William, and all the panelists and my colleagues, the discussants, and also the participants in this very important conversation. I would rather make a very brief comment and perhaps end with a question. But first of all, let me start by acknowledging the role played by the leadership of the National Dialogue in person of the co-chairs and the rapporteur, but also the secretariat of whom Dr. Abraham is here. They have put a lot of energy and they have really used a lot of the expertise in facilitating and leading the process of the national dialogue. And I think the report of the co-chairs, which was presented in the national dialogue, was patriotic and nationalistic in nature. It tells that they are for the people and they don't want to betray the voices of their people. They have made that very clear, and I'm happy for that. And I know the Secretariat have also played great role in documenting the voices of the people. And some of these documentations were brought on, live, through radio and were also reported on television, which was very, very good. And so those documents and those recommendations, in my view, these are the contribution of the people that will remain for life. Just like the Juba Conference, which happened in 1947. And if even us today, we keep on referring to that document, I think the documents of the national dialogue will remain for a longer period because that is the contribution of the people. And so the concerns and the recommendations raised in the national dialogue, they are very genuine. And just like what Dr. Francis Deng said, and others have also echoed on that, it has been very comprehensive. And in my view, and this view is also shared by many colleagues, that the recommendation of the national dialogue is complementary to the other axis. And we believe if it is taken that way, it will definitely move this country forward. Now, the most important thing to note, I think, from this discussion is that the national dialogue process came to an end. The report was released, at least the two versions of the report, which Dr. Abraham talked about. They are yet to be submitted to the leadership of the country and also to the Transitional National Legislative Assembly, but also to the people, which means the delegates and the civil society and all the relevant stakeholders, including IGAD, African Union, and the United Nations, and the rest. So the document actually will be used by all the various stakeholders to help shape the future of the country. And so this discussion came actually in the right time, because our axis is almost moving towards its end. So the question is, what next? And so the National Dialogue report also came around this time. It means it will help shape the way forward in this country.
Thank you.
Now, in the conclusion, I want to conclude with this. I think the major question that we have here, because the report has not been well received, particularly by the leadership. I don't know, because the last comment, there was no clear commitment about implementation of the outcome of the national dialogue. And we know that there are two versions of the report, which means we have to think about the voices of the people versus the source of the power. What I know is that the power lies with the people, and any political party actually tries to buy in the ideas of the people. So the question is now to the ruling party and other political parties, who is willing actually to buy in the ideas of the people, because the people will not let go their ideas. Let me stop here, but I want to thank you and want to assure you that actually as civil society, we are interested to continue to raise awareness among our population about the outcome of the national dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Moses Monday, for your comments and your questions. Yes, we have quite a number of questions coming in from the questions and answers section. But before that, some of the questions are specific to Abraham Awolich. We'll bring that. We are running out of time now, but just very, very fast. I'm giving the opportunity to Dr. Pauline, if you'd like to please comment in any of the questions or comments that were raised earlier by Dr. Harriet, by Dr. Francis, and also by Monday. Just briefly, please, what could you like to say on their concerns?
You're muted, Dr. Pauline.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, just to emphasize the importance of the regional connection. We're not an island on our own, as Honorable Betty said, and our relatives around us have never seemed to have the guts to tell us, you know, politely, but just tell us who we are. They have been very polite and very, unfortunately, I have to use this word, very hypocritical, or rather diplomatic in the things they say. And that does not help at this time, because when we are praised for being naughty, we will think it's the way to behave. So I am happy she said that, and my colleague from the University of Juba also brought that out. But at the same time, I think we as South Sudanese, we really have to take a second and a third look at who we are and what we have been doing. And we cannot depend on our neighbors from outside to clean up the mess we have created. And I am personally convinced that we can correct it and move forward in a decent way. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, Honorable Betty, would you like to come in, please, and talk especially on the role of the region and what they can do as some of the concerns raised by our discussants?
Thanks again for giving me opportunity. It's very unfortunate. I kept losing the speakers. I only heard maybe a quarter of what Dr. Harriet said, maybe also 10% of what Dr. Francis Deng was saying, and Pauline just a little bit, unfortunately. I think the region initially, some respect also, and I want to be frank about this, that the region, to some extent, prolonged the war because of their respective national interests, and because they were not treating the parties with firmness that is necessary, was and still is necessary today. It's like I said earlier on, I found the extraordinary summits by the regional leaders extremely boring, very disappointing, because it's it's rubber stamping, whatever papers were prepared. And I found that a lot of the communique that came out at the end of it all were cut and paste. So I'm sorry to say this, but it's kind of frustrating because you expect firm commitments, and if it's a rebuke or praises, which are genuine, and then move forward to genuinely help the country come out of the conflict. So, but I haven't given up on the regional leaders. I still think we can work with them. It's just that we have slowed down. Things have gone. July 24th of last year, and it clearly came out with what should be done with a definite time frame. But who was there to cross-check that these commitments were implemented? And nothing, zero, zip. And then the next one will come and rush through, and then not knowing what was promised or what had been agreed upon was implemented or not. But I still repeat, I have faith, but we need to keep on engaging them on a very regular basis. And that is how we can keep them awake, so that they are more committed than they are at the moment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Honorable Betty. And yes, we're going to take very fast the last questions and answers, questions that were raised in our questions and answers section. And I know it's time already, but let's just please give ourselves maximum 5 minutes from now, because we started a little late. So let's get question from John Malis, who wrote and said, and this is going to Abraham Awolich, and he said, huge sums of funds was spent in the national dialogue. Abraham and Dr. Francis, should South Sudanese expect some sort of accountability for that money? And also, he talked about, you know, some of the, he said, Abraham, why should parties continue to dialogue on a conclusive process? Is this not like encouraging the status quo to continue indefinitely? The people have spoken, and I don't think parties must discuss what has been discussed. Where is the political will and zeal that pull the process to its end? What are the fears that will impede its implementation? So Abraham, just please briefly, you can respond to these concerns.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, on the financial report of the national dialogue, definitely the national dialogue would definitely be able to offer a public report on the national dialogue and how the funds were spent and how much was actually released to the national dialogue. So I think that is a relevant question. The second aspect of it is the issue of parties continuing to dialogue. When I talk about parties, it doesn't necessarily mean the political parties, but I'm simply referring to state. And so the question was from John was what happens now that the results of the national dialogue are out? What should be remembered is that the steering committee, which was established by the president. It was not an independent entity. So after it has finished its work, it ceased to exist. And so it can no longer continue to carry on the mandate. It has finished its mandate. So the steering committee is no longer there. And so that is why it is up to the citizens of the country who own this process to continue to speak out and to demand the implementation of their final resolutions and the report. That's what I meant by continuing to dialogue. And so we continue to have to demand that these resolutions are implemented. And of course, the nature of the process and the way it was set up meant that the final product has to go back to the government that set up the national dialogue. And that is why if the president and the executive are not taking the report, as I have already indicated, then the parliament would have to step in as representative of the people. If both the parliament and the executive fail to take it up, then I think the next best option is for the citizens of South Sudan to make their voices heard. So that's what I can say about that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Abraham Awolich. I think that's the time we have now. And we have come to the conclusion of this particular discussion. And I would like to take this opportunity to especially thank all of you for taking your time and being with us here and giving us, of course, your elaborations on all these very important conference or this important discussion. I will invite David. David, if you're around, please, for a final remarks, or otherwise we're done here.
Sure,
Thank
yeah,
you.
no, just to thank the panelists for the really great and engaging discussion. And I wish we had all day to talk, but unfortunately our time is up. But I think this is the first of what will be many more discussions on this topic. And I look forward to doing it, whether virtually or in person. I think there's a lot to discuss to make the most out of the opportunity we have here. So thanks so much to you all panelists for your really wonderful contributions, and to the participants for your questions and for taking the time to join us. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.